and welcome to the Passing the Baton to the Next Generation, What's Behind the Horizon panel discussion. My name is Kia Wheeler, and I work for Escalent, and I will be moderating the panel today. I'm very happy to facilitate this discussion and hearing from leaders on what they feel is next in the Commercial Green Initiative. We will have a dedicated Q&A at the end of this discussion, so if you have any questions for our panelists that you want them to answer, please enter them into the chat area, and we will answer them for you at the conclusion of the main discussion. So now, let's hear an introduction from our panelists. So I'll just start and go around the room. Ryan, if you could please introduce yourself to me and the rest of the audience.
Hi, my name is Ryan Pritchard. I am with Pritchard EV. I'm their Chief Revenue Officer, and our organization was founded in 1913. We represent all commercial OEMs. We're a large national distributor of commercial vehicles, so I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Daniel, if you can please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Daniel Malysiak. I'm a technical architect at Work Truck Solutions. I've been here almost 8 years now, close to when shortly after the company started. As you all know, we help build software and technology solutions for the commercial space.
Okay, great, and welcome. And Dave, if you could please introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Hey, I'm Dave Nemerofsky. I'll be representing Kargo Master and the Auto Truck Group in strategic sales for them. We're a van and truck equipment and accessory manufacturer and installer for both small and large fleets across U.S. and Canada. And also part of our family of businesses is a fleet management company called ARI. So luckily we have a little bit of a glimpse, I think, from a couple of different areas to hopefully share with you guys today.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I do appreciate it and look forward to your insights. So let's get started with today's discussion. So my first question for the panel is, how do you view the current state of the commercial fleet industry?
Well, I can jump in here if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Awesome. Well, the commercial industry is really in a state of uncertainty right now. We're seeing a change that's really kind of compiled, starting with the pandemic, leading in then into the chip shortage. And so we've got a very inconsistent supply chain right now. And so we're seeing a lot of our organizations and our customers struggling to catch up and then struggling to plan much further ahead than they're used to. So it's very unique times. And then you add this push to electrification, which is really complicating the process of adoption, which we can talk about in more detail later. But as a fifth generation family member of our automotive industry, and speaking with all of the members of our team historically, this isn't a once in a lifetime transition, it's a once in 5 lifetimes transition. And so there's going to be a lot of new obstacles that we'll have to overcome for adapting to new technology. But overall, the state of the industry, there's huge demand like we haven't seen before. And there's just a lot of different supply constraints at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree, Richard. This pandemic has definitely had an impact not only on this industry, but on the economy as a whole. And I think what differentiates the fleet industry is the way in which it reacts to the problems that we have today. And what I've observed in this industry, kind of just being here at Work Truck Solutions, where we're interacting with a lot of players in the industry, both on the sales side and on the supply side, is that we're all in a state of learning and trying to figure out how to best kind of work through the situation that we're in. So a lot of learning, a lot of kind of planning and figuring out what we all need to do, which is why we're all here today, I think.
Yeah, great points. I think the two main words for me that would sum it up would be uncertainty and volatility. Uncertainty from every different aspect, from the customer side, from myself as our team as a manufacturer when it comes to raw materials and freight charges. They're from this time over 1 year ago compared to now, some things are up 400%. The cost of raw materials and freight, especially as we head into the holiday season, freight will just continue to go through the roof, and uncertainty, it just follows all that. And Same with volatility, pricing volatility, availability of materials, and the continual impact of, if it's not this that's becoming unavailable, it's now something else. So it's kind of the trickle down effect of the supply chain woes over the last 18 months that 2 years ago none of us would have ever thought possible. But hopefully we're trying to right the ship here and give our customers and the industry things that they can hopefully lay their hat on and feel confident about what's heading into the next year.
Mm-hmm. So all of you has said, uncertainty is the big word for the state of the industry at the moment. How are you, if you are part of the fleet industry or, working with customers with their fleets, how are you navigating this uncertainty?
With our organization, our customers, it's really taking a deep dive and getting creative. It's extending the life of the vehicles they have on the road today. It's adjusting your procurement cycle to now go from your 16 to 20 weeks. Some of these guys are almost a year out. And so it's really a learning session to say, hey, how do we respond and react? How do we make do, close the gap until we get back to where we used to be with free-flowing production?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from our industry and our side, we're just trying to be a partner with our customers and try to be as transparent as possible with any information that we're getting from OEMs or other suppliers or other manufacturers. Not trying to hide behind the fact that things are changing, and it's just trying to be upfront with our customers as possible on different solutions. And like Ryan said, being proactive and reacting to what we can actually control. And there's things beyond our control, but it's how we relay that information and be a partner with our customers, I think will go a long way with their relationship with us as we head hopefully outside of this environment in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. When it comes to all of the change that people have mentioned, whether that was uncertainty or, as Ryan had said, also looking at the electrification of vehicles, what aspects of the industry do you feel are maybe not changing fast enough to deal with some of these changes and this uncertainty?
So just some of my observations in terms of change is that one thing I've observed in this industry is sometimes that the adoption of technology can be slow. And not to say that technology is good to adopt and it's just for the sake of it, but understanding what tools are out there and how it can be helpful for the industry and for a particular use case. And I think it's more about being more open to adopting new tools and technology for the situation we're in.
I would piggyback on Dave then in adding to that. I think transparency really is the key. We need to be more transparent as the capacity for these OEMs. We need to, data is now more important than ever, and having insight into what our constraints are and understanding that. And again, Dave hit it right on the head when he said we're being proactive in communicating. There's things out of our control. People are a lot more understanding, but we have to be able to get that information faster is really where my head's at. These are revenue generating vehicles, unlike your personal vehicles where people's livelihood depends on them. And so we need to do a better job planning, and we can't plan without having transparent information from our suppliers and OEMs, all understanding it's a moving target. We're in unprecedented times, but yet we still need, I think that's a big piece of what needs to change is that transparency.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could add, when you talk about not changing fast enough, I guess in direct relation to EVs, I think it's in one of the earlier sessions, there was the image of a chicken and an egg. And we have some pretty large customers under our management. And is it whether or not, I think it's not whether or not they're going to have EVs, it's just when, but will the infrastructure follow quickly enough for them to actually be able to implement it? How will it affect their daily operations? Will it be different as they know it today, moving into the EV space? And it really is a decision by the company. Is it something that they really want to do from a sustainability standpoint, or are they just doing it to check a box, because if it's that, then the adoption might be a little slower. If they really see the value and the benefits of moving towards EVs, then I think the adoption will happen much quicker.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me ask a question here. I want to talk about the information and transparency that Ryan brought up. So you said that's something that is, not moving fast enough in the commercial fleet space at the moment. What do you think would need to change to actually move the needle on that particular issue? How could that, start to turn around and that transparency becomes better?
That's the $1 million question. In my opinion, it's really a shift towards a digital platform. It's integrating it's understanding that we're dealing with some heavyweights in the OEM space with Ford, Ram, and GM, and they have layers and layers and layers of deep technology that they've been building on for a long time. But technology's been evolving and changing, and they continue to just build on top of something rather than wipe the slate clean. And I think we really need to take a hard look at a lot of the manual-driven tasks that are on the commercial side in particular. Because if I could send Dave a note and say, "Hey, Dave, how many Cargo Master configurations can you do for me on a cargo van?" It's infinite. It's an infinite amount. And so we really need to start leveraging the technology to build in the artificial intelligence and the AI-based learning so we can really streamline that process moving forward. And I think that only comes through collaboration from your OEMs, your upfitters, and your dealer groups. And once that kind of gets a little bit more streamlined, I think you're going to see a lot of that transparency come to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Let's talk up a point that Dave brought up. So the idea of electric vehicles or EVs. What do we feel, and this is open for all the panelists, but what do we feel would help move the needle on that adoption? As Dave said, it may be, because people really think it's a sustainability thing, or that they're just checking a box. Either way, those things could move this particular industry forward. What do you feel would need to change to help move it along to electric vehicle adoption even faster than it is today?
So I guess my perspective, I think some of our customers are asking more about EVs and implementing EVs into their fleet than ever before. And some of that may be in direct correlation to the lack of other vehicles that they've already had orders canceled on. I think some of the OEMs are kind of distinguishing whether they continue to build some of their combustion engine vehicles over not taking away from what they're building from the EV side of things. So I think that's certainly perking some customers' ears up. So I can maybe get a vehicle that I wasn't expecting to get, but if it's an EV, it gives me an opportunity to get that vehicle and also try the technology at the same time.
So from my observation, so I kind of grew up around back in a past life. I worked in a newspaper company where there was a big fleet of box trucks and cargo vans, and just thinking about like what would it take for a company like that if they had to adopt an EV today. And the biggest thing that was question that popped into my mind was how fast can that vehicle recharge? Many times during a route, the vehicle has to potentially refuel in the middle, and right now that takes maybe 10 minutes. If the vehicle takes a long time to refuel, that changes how many routes can be performed within a given day, how many drivers have to be hired. And I think a lot of those questions of just the operational, what data about the electric vehicle impacts the operation of the business. And having that information readily available to the end consumer will aid in the decisions that they'll need to make in terms of how many vehicles do I need to buy, how many people do I need to hire to drive those vehicles for a given day.
Okay, great. Let's talk about this because it's come up that there are and people are turning the tide and looking at electric vehicles. how has the inclusion of electric vehicles changed the state of the commercial fleet industry, if it has at all currently?
I'd argue that the electric vehicles may not have an impact on the commercial fleets, but regulation most definitely is. And regulation's pulling that adoption ahead. And so I really think that the industry is going to change whether they like it or not. It's a matter of time. It's really becoming a task outside of their hands within the states that are under that memo of understanding with California. And so you're going to see fleets have to face this challenge. And so the most surprising thing for me has been when you meet with your customers, you have to understand their route characteristics, their dwell time, and the mileage they put on each day. So I think the step one is understanding your own fleet very intimately, and then step two beyond that is we need more offerings. It's such a use case specific vehicle in regards to electrification, as Daniel spoke to, is how do you refuel it? Where do you park it? How do you service it? And so I think once we have more OEM offerings and we have more validated vehicles on the road in the commercial space, particularly, I think that's really going to pull forward adoption for the right use cases.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think some of the things that maybe people don't necessarily think of when I'm coming from the upfitter and manufacturer side is, a lot of these, at least from a van standpoint, an EV, or say e-Transit, for example, all the batteries are mounted below the cargo area. That could really potentially impact what we can mount into the van as far as shelving, interior products, partition, any different accessories. There's pretty much the large majority of that cargo area is a no drill zone. So now that's requiring us to instead place a subfloor that we can now mount accessories into. And then from the actual installer, do we have to put our own charging facilities and charging capabilities in there? How much do we charge a vehicle when we're delivering the customer the vehicle? It's no longer just, all right, we'll put a quarter tank in there and they're off and running. It's when they get the vehicle, are they going to be able to drive it? Are they going to have to fully charge it before they use it? So there's a lot of questions and unknowns that I think the industry still needs to kind of work through before I think adoption really takes off.
And just to even reiterate, Dave, what's your volume? Pick a location that you do some volume at. Do you have any numbers, just rough numbers in a month, what you'd run through on a location with ARI, Cargo Master, et cetera?
As far as just vans and
just throw a general number out there.
We've during real peak seasons of some deliveries over the last couple of years, we've put in some of our facilities out 1,000 vans a month.
Now think of the juice that Dave's going to need to keep those all charged. The amount of infrastructure. I think a lot of people are overlooking that. As well. So even with our market, we're in Iowa. We've got locations nationwide, but when you see our vehicles parked outside, we've had them running for a year. You see them in the winter, and they're all going to need a trickle charge. So imagine 1,000 vehicles out there needing 1,000 plugs just to make it to the bay to get the upfit done. So there's a lot of things that we need to start recognizing up front in order to make this adoption successful. It needs to be a responsible, future-proof version because it is such a high investment.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, you brought up a good point at the beginning of your response of saying, right now there's not enough variety and body styles that are out there, and the EVs currently play a specific role in the fleet. So in your mind, and this is for the panel as well, but I'll start with Ryan. In your mind, what role does EVs play in the commercial fleet industry today?
So I think with the right application, there's no doubt electrifying your fleet is the way to go. Less maintenance, very transparent with it. It's very robust data collection through that's just inherent in having an electric vehicle. So I guess there's a variety of ways we can look at that, I guess. So I guess I'd pass it to the other guys, get their opinion. I'll regroup on this one.
Oh, that's fine. You can think about it. For others, what do we think is the role of EVs today?
I think it's an important one, and I think it's been proven already that in some industries it's a slam dunk, and it just makes so much sense to do it. For example, a lot of the space that we're dealing with today is parcel delivery, and especially in an urban type environment where a lot of stop and go and recharging is available pretty much, on any corner for them. It makes so much sense. The ROI is there. I think maybe in some of the longer haul, more rural, that's where the conversation maybe becomes a little bit different. But again, I think it really comes down to what the fleet or what the company's, either mission statement or mindset on sustainability might be, because that can be a big driver. Having the CFO and the chief sustainability officer kind of on the same page, I think will help adoption in a company where they're aligned. And if they're not, then there could definitely be some challenges there.
And then just building on that, looking at it not just from the customer standpoint or the fleet needs, is looking at the community needs as well. A lot of the groups that we work with are, for example, schools. You've got noise pollution where these buses start up. You've got the smog and the emissions that go around that. When we do our work in the ports, you can see it's just a really high dense area. They're not running big routes. And then when you work with an account like Disney, where backstage at Disney, all of their work happens at night. So having the no noise pollution, not having the emissions, and then having that transparent data stream really allows for your fleet to truly optimize itself and start generating, returns that may not be calculated in your total cost of ownership, that go to driver experience, that go to your environmental needs, that go to the community around you.
Hey, Daniel, for you, from your point of view, what do you feel is the role of EVs in the commercial fleet today, if you feel they have a role?
Well, I definitely second Ryan and Dave's observations on the types of industries that could utilize EVs today based on the infrastructure that's out there and the type of vehicles that are out there. But I also think that it's a lot of these companies that I think are trying them out are also learning, and the companies that have yet to adopt that are looking to those early adopters as examples to see potentially what is possible. So there's definitely an early adopter type of situation right now with the EV industry, where a lot of these big companies who do want to promote themselves as a green company have an incentive to kind of tout that they have these EV vehicles, as well as the business sense, the business benefits that they come with. But I think for the majority of the industry, it's definitely the EV today's experiment and hoping to learn something about it.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, you bring me to my next point. So we're talking about green initiatives in the commercial space and the inclusion of electric vehicles, but not everyone is necessarily on board and including EVs in their fleet, for whether they think it's an experiment, the learning curve from it they're trying to stay away from. As Ryan pointed out, this is their livelihoods. It's a big risk to go to electric vehicles for many people. So I wanted to understand, have any of you all encountered such perceptions where people are hesitant about including electric vehicles? And how did you address that? How did you try to explain or justify that electric vehicles may be the way to go?
Well, I for one have heard it even from my own family who work in the commercial space too, and the conversations that we've had. It's not the first time in history that an industry had to change the type of energy it's used. Right? If you look back last century, the railroad industry had to go through the same process and transition away from the coal to the steam engine to the diesel engine, and they too also had regulations that were looming, and eventually, it was regulations were such that it was no longer possible to operate those type of engines, and they went through similar types of situations they went to today. At the time, the diesel engines weren't as powerful as the steam engines at the time, so they had to make smaller routes and have smaller railroads. And anyway, the point is that change is hard, but if regulation is going to force our hand for one reason or another, it is eventually going to happen at some point? And how soon do you want to start preparing for the potential eventuality of having to convert to EV? It's kind of what we talked about.
We run into it very frequently in commercial. The payload, recharging. I mean, when you sit and we're working with infrastructure as a big play, and you see, even with a DC fast charger, I'm there 30 minutes juicing up, and I can watch 30 other vehicles fuel and deploy at the same amount of time it takes me to move one. So there's definitely needs to be technology evolution that trails with this as well. But once you start digging into it, once we have the validation, once we can truly show the real savings on cost of ownership, because it is a premium purchase that's unproven, which causes a lot of people hesitancy. But as soon as you dive into the onboard telematics, the over-the-air updates, and the transparency of proactively maintaining these vehicles, they really start seeing the value in electrification. And you start small, you pilot, and you grow. Because if you just buy an electric vehicle and pop in a charger, it's going to fail. If you just, it's not that simple. So you really have to take a mindful, intentional approach to your outcome. And I think once people see it in that fashion, even if it takes time just for them to evaluate their own fleet and say, how can I make my own fleet more efficient, and then transition, I think that's really what it's going to come down to.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be naysayers in any industry for any change that is ever going to come out. So it's just, I think using the data, and data is very important in today's world. We all know that. The business case will continue to be more impactful as more and more people have converted to EVs, and the data will support the move to it. And you can just see the change that's happened, from 10 years ago today. What will happen 10 years from now on, range and the capabilities that EVs and battery electric vehicles have, what they're capable of holding, and payload, as Ryan mentioned, and the kind of upfits that can come with an EV. I think the landscape is just going to continue to open and broaden. And as long as the business case continues to make more and more sense, then I think people will just continue to adapt. Now, will it ever be 100%? I'm not saying we're ever going to get there, not for a long time, but I think there's a lot of factors that will play into either forcing companies or just making it where they really can't say no to the business case.
So you've all brought up this idea of the business case, or the information that needs to come out to get people on board with even piloting an electric vehicle. So what types of questions are your customers, or that you're hearing, maybe like Daniel from family and friends, that people are asking about when it comes to, why should I have an electric vehicle in my fleet? I heard Ryan say payload, need the payload. But what are some other things that people are kind of questioning about using electric vehicles in their commercial fleets?
I can take that one. I kind of mentioned it earlier. Is I think kind of goes along the lines of payload, but what can I put inside my van? Can I still do the same job that I do today with the ICE vehicle that I will be able to do with an EV? Will I have the same will I be able to use tools off the vehicle? And I think in some cases it might even be a benefit to have the EV in using alternate power sources for tools. So I think the upfit portion sometimes is left off of the conversation, because maybe more of a focus might be in other areas of converting other types of vehicles. But I think if we can work out that you can do the same exact job function that you do today in an EV, then I think that would go a long way in creating adoption.
And then building on that, your next steps are going to be, how do I service that vehicle? How do I train these individuals? And then always safety comes up. And so I think once you learn about the redundancies built into these vehicles, you meet with the local EMS providers, it really helps overcome that conversation. And then building into, my favorite question when they talk about the price is I just ask, did they buy the lifetime of fuel with their vehicle when they purchased it? And so it's pulling that out of, it's changing the way they look at this vehicle itself. And then really going down into the energy management side of things, where that becomes your next point of conversation. And by the time you dig into it, you see so much efficiency savings just in their current operation that's available to them, that it lends itself to that extra capacity towards these EVs. So there's just a variety of ways to look at it. Every customer is unique. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ryan. It's basically converting the operating cost into a capital cost up front, where it's and sometimes the leader of where those two cost sectors roll up to is a different person. So that's why I think it can be a hard conversation sometimes, because a cap cost versus an operation cost could be two completely separate divisions.
Okay, so we talked about the role of EVs today, the questions that you're hearing. What do you all see for the electric vehicles and the commercial industry space in the next 5 to 7 years? Do you see it being at the same kind of level, still trying to get past some of these operational hurdles and understanding the benefits? Or do you feel like some industries are going to be full steam ahead and then some other ones are going to be still at this pilot stage or this early adopter stage?
I think we're at a point right now where, at least from the FMC side, fleet management company side, we're seeing more fleets than ever take advantage of either a demo or pilot unit, whatever you want to call it, with OEMs that actually offer an EV. And in this case, I'm talking specifically about vans and pickups. So now that so many large household company names are taking advantage of this, I think we'll really see over the next couple of years that if the pilot goes well, then adoption could really significantly increase.
Yeah, and building on that, these pilots are going to continue over the next 2 to 3 years as products become available. In the commercial space, there's still very, very few purpose-built OEM offerings. And I think it's going to take time to get those manufactured appropriately, get them in the right people's hands. They'll lay in, your pilot, they'll lay in a smaller chunk, and then they really need to plan, 7 to 10 years out, really beyond this 5 to 7. The 5 to 7, I think you're going to see a lot of infrastructure going in, and that's going to really lay the foundation as product and technology catches up, specifically in the commercial space. The adoption is going to go through the roof, but I think it's going to be pushed beyond the 5 to 7 year threshold in commercial particularly.
Okay, great. So kind of intermingled into all of people's responses was this idea of transparency with the vehicle manufacturers. So I would like to ask if you were able to just send out kind of a challenge to some of these OEMs out there. What challenge would you give them to say, this is what you need to do to help fleets make that transition to EVs easier?
I'd love to take this one.
Go ahead, Ryan.
This space in particular, you're seeing a lot of new startups come, and you see a lot of people selling direct. And I think we can't abandon the distribution channels that exist today. I think people underestimate the unique needs of the end user. And with a lot of OEMs circumventing a dealer network, it really is going to put a lot of stress on the customer experience, the responsiveness, that first layer of value add that these dealers have. And it doesn't come down to the dirty word dealer, apparently, in this industry. It's not a dirty word. It's who owns the relationship. And if an OEM can handle that relationship, then they have every right to sell them direct. But my challenge is really not abandoning what got us here, forcing the right dealers to adapt so they do add value to that conversation. And that's the challenge I've got, is don't circumvent the dealers, guys. Let us work with the upfitters. Let us work with the logistics. Let us know and understand a supply chain that's been there and adapt it to EV. Let's not reinvent the wheel. We're reinventing how it's powered.
It's a great point. Customer experience is paramount, probably more important now than it has ever been before, with everybody with access to everything at their fingertips and the ability to review anything and post it online. Customer experience is a major focus with everything. So I think that's a great point. But in my industry, the challenge I'd give to EV manufacturers that would help us is give us, as a manufacturer and an upfitter, give us access to as much of schematics, layouts, CAD, anything that will help us do our job more effectively, so we can help integrate our products into the fleets that'll go mainstream, the better. Because if we don't get that kind of information, then we're already behind the 8 ball when these vehicles come out. We're going to have to reverse engineer things that will work for customers, where if we have that kind of information and data ahead of time, we'll be much better prepared when it comes time to actually install these into customers' vehicles.
I'd like to build on Dave's point here about the transparency of the data from about the specifications about the chassis that these manufacturers are building. Coming from the digital space, one of Worktrack Solutions, we really try to make that data available and structured and easily searchable, and so that buyers can filter and find the specific vehicles they're looking for. And oftentimes the data points that are really important for commercial, like wheelbase or cab axle, for example, it's actually really hard to find, often buried in those PDFs or schematics that Dave has. So my challenge to the industry is to make that data easier for the digital space to consume.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have focused primarily on electric vehicles. But I just want to open up this final question, is just to ask, where do you think the industry growth will come from in the next, let's say, 7 to 10 years, since Ryan had said definitely EVs will probably push out to that. Where do you see the main industry growth coming from? Is it electric vehicles being integrated? Is it some other new technology that's coming?
Well, I think we're about to see over the next year, 2 years, with all the thousands of orders that have been canceled over the last year from manufacturers and continue to be canceled. That's extending the life cycle of vehicles that are already in service. So operation expenses are going to continue to rise, which will it kind of goes directly against what we preach as a fleet management company, which is consistent replacement, so you can predict your operation expenses and predict new capital expenses and make everything kind of stay flat. With the rise in operating expenses, we're going to see, I think customers are going to need to replace more than they ever had before. So it could be a really good opportunity for EVs to really make their way into mainstream with a lot of replacements. But I think, unfortunately, customers will take whatever they can get when it comes time to needing a vehicle. So I could see either sides of it taking longer because of that, or maybe accelerating because of that.
And kind of building on that volatility that you're talking about, Dave, I think it's going to come. I think that's going to force a lot of people to look at new models. I think they're going to start looking at more of a shared asset platform. I think FMCs are going to see the most amount of growth out of anybody here when they can take a vehicle, instead of dedicating it to one, now they can dedicate it to everybody on a shared platform. And then ultimately, I really foresee that autonomous technology that's integrated into these vehicles start to get activated more and more and more down the line. So I think you're going to see a lot of changes in the technology platform. So that's really going to drive adoption, not just for EVs, but higher utilization for your ICE vehicles as well.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, you brought up the point of information, that you are really trying to provide to people, but I'll open this up to the group. What information do you feel, commercial fleet managers are really looking for when it comes to purchasing, specific vehicles? So I know, it's that a cost over a lifetime is really big. But one of the conversations yesterday was talking about that not everybody looks at that type of stuff, not to the extent of what some people think they do. So I want to hear from you all when it comes to information that you could potentially get from an EV or, just in general, what kinds of things are people looking at to say, this vehicle is giving me the ROI that I need versus not?
Well, from what I've seen it, so I'll get to the ROI in a bit, but oftentimes when these OEMs are manufacturing the chassis, it's just a bare chassis, and it's the dimensions about the vehicle that are important to understand what type of upfit can be applied to it. And it's those dimensions that are often, like I said earlier, buried in schematics and often difficult to get to. And in terms of the ROI from the EV side, so I've seen range as being the primary key thing that companies are talking about with these EV vehicles. But range is it can vary so much, especially as you start moving up to the higher class vehicles, where the type of weight or cargo you're carrying varies greatly, and that range number becomes the range number that's advertised becomes increasingly less accurate, or right, because it varies so much. What really I think may matter is how fast it can charge between fast to full. So rather than range, it's how fast can a vehicle charge. And I understand that has the type of charging station you're using, whether a level 1, 2, or all the way up to a 4, has an impact, but also the type of battery and the energy management software that's applied to the vehicle also has an impact on charge time. And separately, the weight capacity of the vehicles, I think, is also important. But that's just from my observation from just the digital platform of advertising the vehicles to the buyers. I know Ryan or Dave probably have more insight on the specific business cases. So.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
Just reiterating what Daniel said, it's step one is understanding your fleet characteristics. That's what it all comes down to. That's the information that we need both internally with the customer and externally with the vehicle use cases. That's a very big piece.
I'd say one piece that could be potentially overlooked, or maybe more important to some, if they're not as in tune to the data side of things, is the user experience for their drivers. It's becoming more important as the job market is pretty volatile these days. Trying to keep talent or employees happy, engaged, and actually working for you. Sometimes a vehicle is a big component to that. We've seen some drivers leave companies, go to the same industry just because they offer a better vehicle. So if an EV adds to the user experience of actually doing your job and using that vehicle as part of your work, then maybe that can help drive adoption as well. And something that is harder to quantify when it comes to ROI or numbers, but could be equally, if not even more important to a company's goals.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our main portion of the conversation and panel, but we're going to open up the discussion for any audience questions. So any viewers, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. We do have one question that has come through from Scott L. It says, I'm a supplier to the OEMs. Our major raw material spend is steel, and it's rising quickly. We just got hit with 30% in a plant, along with a 20 to 26-week lead time. We anticipate this to hit globally. Also, a friend of mine in the automotive space saying chemical suppliers of the sodium hydroxide and sulfuric acid are having massive shortages and price hikes. How will you deal with these cost and supply issues coming quickly down the pipe?
I can take that first, as it directly impacts our business as a manufacturer. It's something we're looking at very closely. One thing that we're trying not to do is react so instantly on what has gone in terms of rising prices, and trying to take a step back and maybe a longer term view on all right, where will these costs actually be? Maybe in the middle of the year. And we kind of feel like they went up exponentially over the last couple of months, but we've seen them as of late start to not level off, but start on their way back down. So we're trying to hold steady, not completely gouge the pricing when it could be completely different at this point next year. So from a manufacturer point of view, we're trying to, I guess, absorb as much of those costs as possible. Hopefully that we're in a better situation this point next year.
And our only hope is that these rising costs translates to higher residuals. And for leasing companies like an ARI, we can help bridge that gap by having, similar payment, stronger residuals. But for people buying outright, it's just the new normal. We're going to have to learn that procurement cycle. We're going to know when to dispose appropriately. It's just, I think it's a pretty universal problem that doesn't just relate to this industry, and inflation's occurring, and we're just going to have to adapt our model really to the best of our ability because there's a lot of things out of our control.
Okay, great. So we have a next question from Rohan J, and I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Forgive me. So what is the possible drawback of electric vehicles? So we all kind of talked, or you all talked about some of the positives that are there, but what are some of the real drawbacks that you see as well?
Range, price, the fact that now you have to rely on a charger and a vehicle. So if a charger's down, your vehicle's down. There's a lot of different variables that we can go into. You've got the higher carbon footprint in the manufacturing process of these batteries that we have to look at. We have to look at longevity of the batteries, recycling of the batteries. There's just a laundry list of obstacles that we have to overcome, but they're not unique to what other manufacturers are facing in their product lines as well. So the biggest one from our standpoint that we have to overcome is really the safety hazards of these electric vehicles. If there's a thermal runoff, how do the emergency providers know how to put out that fire appropriately? Do they have the right technology in a worst case scenario? I think there's a lot of truth to, you're working on high voltage vehicles, you're dealing with a high capacity battery. Once people are familiar with that technology, I think those concerns are going to go away. But until we do a better job of proactively reaching out to the local fire and EMS providers and training our techs appropriately so they know what to touch, what not to touch, how to shut off high voltage, I think that's a very big issue that we have to look at as well. But all things that we can overcome, because when you look at the entire ecosystem, I believe it's better with the alternative fuel.
Yeah, I think Ryan mentioned it. But if the battery fails, and I don't know if some EVs haven't been in service long enough to really see the full life cycle of, when the battery will fail, and what happens when it does. Does that mean the vehicle's almost totaled at that point because it's such a high cost? What's the ease that you can swap out a battery, and then disposal of that battery from either a dealership or the service center will be different than probably something that they're used to today, like a core return type opportunity for distribution companies on where to properly dispose of these and where are you going to put them.
You bring up a good point about disposal of batteries. I know I just read that Ford is partnering with a company that would take back and recycle their batteries. Do you see more of those type of partnerships happening out for the fleet commercial? Or is it more of I should say, do you see that happening quicker in the fleet space than the consumer space?
I would. Another company that's part of our group it's called Home and Parts Distribution. That's one of the main focuses that they do is core return. Historically, they've done transmissions and engines and taken those back to the OEMs for proper recycling. But we've started to look at how we do that for fleet specifically when it comes to batteries and dealerships. So I think a large partnership opportunity will be with the fleet side.
Mhm.
And it'll lend itself. I really think battery recycling is critical. We have a limited supply of the elements. It's my understanding that you can recover a significant amount of lithium in the recycling process. So, and that's even before it gets there. I think fleets are going to be a huge source for alternative energy, specifically wind, specifically stationary storage for a lot of these manufacturing facilities, and integrating solar as well. So I think throughout the entire life cycle, that battery is going to see a few different use cases prior to getting to the final disposal part. And then at that point, I do think the recapture will be there. It just has to physically be there.
I wanted to ask a question about range, because that's something that all of you all have brought up, and things that I hear when I am talking to on the consumer side and some of the fleet manager side as well, about this idea of range. I need lots of range. And in one of the sessions here, it's the idea of I need range to be the same amount that I have in my tank of gas. So that could be 3, 4, whatever it is, miles to the gallon. But most people aren't driving that amount by the time they would need to actually refuel and re-engage. So how do you talk to your customers about this idea of range and what they actually need?
Yeah, range anxiety will always be there, I guess. And at what level is it no longer there? Is it 300, 400, 500 miles? I think you're right when you say that most people aren't driving that much where they wouldn't be able to come recharge or be back in an opportunity or environment where they could charge it. So I think the range anxiety might be becoming less and less of a concern as the ranges that are available are becoming longer and longer. But I think it all comes down to what's the use case for the vehicle. Are you straight driving with no access to a charge opportunity for 300 miles? Maybe it's not the best use case for you then, but I'd say a large majority of fleets are not doing that, and they would have the opportunity to recharge at some point. So it kind of takes the range out of the equation, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we may have one more question coming in. It's being typed now. Daniel, do you have anything to add to that idea? This idea of range and range anxiety. Do you think it's becoming less as the range goes up, or do you feel like that's just something that will never go away?
Well, just from my experience, the biggest, like I mentioned earlier, it's more about how fast can vehicles get put back into service between charges. I think is from what I've heard from my kind of perspective is because it's for at least the businesses that I've kind of interacted with and talked to. It's really that since the vehicles are such an investment, the vehicles have to be out on the road and in work for as long as possible. And if there are long charging times for those vehicles, regardless of how long the range is, if it takes 4 or 5 hours to charge the vehicle, that means that's 4 or 5 hours that vehicle is not able to work, and that has an impact at the bottom line at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I lost you guys there.
No, that's okay. Ryan, my question for the panel was, people, you all had kind of brought up range, this idea of range. And I know in my work that I do with consumers or with commercial fleet managers, this idea of they need at least enough range as they have now in their current vehicle. When many times, not all the times, many times we know that's not the case, that they don't need 300 miles of range because they're not driving that distance in a single use case. Not as Dave brought up, that is not always the case, but in some cases it is. They're not going to ever drive that amount. So how do you talk to your customers about range and this idea of range anxiety to help them overcome that hurdle?
A lot of people are surprised about how little they drive. And when you look at the extremes of the range, a high mileage year one vehicle has 15,000 miles on it, which means they're putting on 41 miles on average a day. Your typical commercial application is running UPS routes is 62 miles per day. So when you really break it down and look at your driving habits, the vehicles fit the use case. It comes down to worst case, how do you charge the vehicle? And second case, planning routes more efficiently. And that's what I don't think people like, the planning aspect of it. But range to me, for 90% of the use cases, should not be an issue. And just as an example, with our vehicle portion of it, when a consumer has that concern, we give them 4 rentals a year for an ICE vehicle should they need to take that road trip. And we're finding even by giving them 4, they're only needing it twice a year. And so I think it's an education. It's understanding your driving habits, understanding your route, and then pretty soon range won't be as big of an issue. But when it is an issue, it's a major issue because, I'm stuck with this big thing in a market where I've got access to maybe 3 chargers that'll fit a vehicle of that size in it. And the majority are level 2s. Dunkin' Donuts doesn't want me parked out front for 8 hours. Not enough coffee in the world to disrupt traffic as long as that thing gets out there. So I'd argue that range is just it's a better understanding. And again, it's an average. So half of the group it's not going to apply to, the below half it's a perfect application to. It's starting to take a small bite of the apple until technology can extend itself to the ranges people think they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's an easy, deterrent or excuse, I guess you could say, for a client to maybe not want to go in that direction, or a driver to not want to go in that direction, and just chalk it up to, I'm not comfortable with the range. I think as that continues to increase, it'll be less. Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of the house hunter mentality, right? I need a 4-bedroom house for the one time every 2 years I have a guest. All right, so we have one more question here for the panel from Neil V.S. So what is the current or future legislation going to be on state U.S. roads tax on EVs, and what customers will think when they have to pay this all at one time?
It's going to be ugly because it's not even about the mileage itself, the use tax that they're discussing. It goes beyond the privacy issue of tracking those miles. And it's really going to follow the CARES Act, who owns that data, who should have access to that data. But at some point, it's going to get passed along. So if they would rather not pay a usage tax on their electric vehicles, the registration costs are going to go through the roof. And I know that my personal feeling is that with this much government incentive that's available, they're going to say, we gave you the opportunity to help offset those upfront costs that they will then lend down the line, whether that comes from zero emission delivery zones, special parking for EVs, special lanes for EVs. I think they're going to have to find a way to recoup this cost. So I think that it's going to be a challenge, but we're already doing it. So it's just having a deeper understanding of where those costs are getting allocated and understanding what those costs are and understanding we need roads to drive.
All right. Well, that is our time, everyone. I want to thank you all for participating in the panel discussion today. You gave some great insights. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of the viewers out there that joined us today and watched the panel. We do appreciate your participation with just viewing or additional questions. So thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.